Son-in-law sent me a formal email on a Tuesday afternoon. The subject line read, "Boundaries. Important." I was sitting at the kitchen table finishing a cup of coffee, still in my work shirt from the morning even though I'd been retired for 3 years. Old habits. I opened the email expecting something about Thanksgiving plans or maybe a question about the car I'd offered to help them buy. Instead, I read 7 paragraphs explaining, in the careful language of someone who had clearly rehearsed this, that my visits were creating an unhealthy dynamic in their home, that my daughter needed space to grow into her own identity as a wife and mother, and that effective immediately. I was not welcome at their house unless specifically invited. He had CC'd my daughter on the email. She hadn't replied to it. She hadn't called me either. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the backyard. The apple tree my wife had planted the year our daughter was born was starting to lose its leaves. October in Ohio does that. Strips things bare whether you're ready or not. I am Gilbert Moore. I'm 64 years old. For 32 years, I worked as a civil engineer for the city of Columbus. I designed drainage systems, retaining walls, road beds. My job was to make sure the ground held. I retired on a Thursday, went fishing on Friday, and spent the following Monday helping my daughter and her husband move into the house I'd quietly been subsidizing for 2 years. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was building something solid for the people I loved. I didn't see the rot in the foundation until it had already spread through the whole floor. My daughter's name is Alice. She was 29 when all of this happened. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and a laugh that used to fill up whatever room she was in. I lost my wife, Carol, to ovarian cancer 8 years ago. Alice and I got through that the way you get through a house fire. Together, scorched, grateful to be alive. After Carol died, Alice and I became close in the way that grief makes people close. We talked every Sunday. We had dinner on the first Saturday of every month. She was my person. Then she married Kevin. Kevin was a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company. He wore slim-fit dress shirts and had opinions about wine. He called me Gilbert, never Gil, even after I'd asked twice. I didn't dislike him in the beginning. He was ambitious, polished, the kind of man who knew how to make a good first impression and then slowly reveal that the impression was the whole performance. Alice loved him. That was enough for me. For a while. The first time he asked me for money, it was wrapped in so much context and justification that I almost didn't recognize it as asking. They wanted to buy a house in Bexley. Good neighborhood. Good schools. Carol would have approved of the street. Their combined income was solid but not quite enough for the down payment, not with Kevin's student loans and the credit card balance they'd racked up on the wedding. I wrote a check for $40,000. A gift, I told Alice. No strings. I meant it. 14 months later, Kevin's car needed a new transmission. Then their HVAC system failed in July. Then there was the bathroom remodel that Alice had apparently been dreaming about for years, and Kevin had apparently promised her without thinking through who would pay for it. Each time, the ask came through Alice softly, with a little pre-apology attached. And each time I helped, because she was my daughter and I had the money, and Carol was gone, and this was the only family I had left. I went over on Sundays. I fixed things around the house because Kevin didn't own a toolbox and didn't seem interested in acquiring one. I played with my granddaughter, Maki, who was 4 years old and obsessed with horses and called me Pop Pop in a voice that made me feel like I could carry the whole world on my back without complaint. I didn't think I was hovering. I thought I was present. There is a difference. At least, I used to think there was. The Tuesday I got that email, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about calling Alice. I thought about forwarding the email back to Kevin with one sentence. Call me. Instead, I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and started doing what engineers do when something fails. I started documenting. I pulled up my bank records going back 30 months. I opened a spreadsheet. I am not a dramatic man, but what I saw on that screen was dramatic enough. The down payment, the HVAC, the transmission on Kevin's Audi, the bathroom remodel, which I'd been told was a small refresh and had somehow become $47,000 in marble and custom tile. A loan for Kevin's business idea that had lasted 6 weeks before he quietly shelved it. Regular transfers that I had started making to their joint account to help with what Alice called the gap, the space between what they spent and what they earned. In 30 months, I had put $211,000 into their lives. I closed the laptop. I poured myself a glass of water. I stood at the sink and looked at the apple tree again. $211,000. And I was the one being told to stay away. I didn't call Alice that night. I didn't reply to the email. I went to bed, stared at the ceiling for 2 hours, and made a decision. The next morning I called my attorney, a woman named Sylvia Hartman who had handled Carol's estate and had been trying, gently and professionally, to get me to stop treating my retirement savings like a community fund. Sylvia answered on the second ring. I told her I needed to come in. I told her to pull everything she had on the personal loans I'd extended, the gift documentation, and the promissory note Kevin had signed for the business loan. $30,000, demand note, repayable in full upon request. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Gilbert, we've talked about this." "I know," I said. "Now I'm ready to listen." I drove downtown. Sylvia's office is on the 14th floor with a view of the Scioto River. She had the files already on her desk when I walked in, which told me she'd been waiting for this appointment longer than I had. She is 61, sharp, and has the particular patience of someone who has watched too many good people give away too much. She turned her computer screen toward me. The number at the bottom of the ledger was $211,400. She had already done the math. "The promissory note," I said. "Call it in." She leaned back in her chair. "Kevin signed it. He can't pay it." "I know he can't pay it. That's the point." She studied me for a moment, then picked up her pen. "What else?" "The gift letter for the down payment was structured as a gift. We can't touch that, but everything after, the transfers, the loans, the verbal agreements I was stupid enough not to document." I slid a folder across her desk. "I documented them." Sylvia looked through the folder slowly. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her eyebrows move once, just slightly, when she got to the receipts for the bathroom remodel. Kevin had used my transfer to pay the contractor, then paid himself back from the same account for project management. He had charged himself a fee to spend my money on his own house. "That," Sylvia said quietly, tapping the page, "is interesting." "Draft the demand letter for the promissory note," I said. $30,000 plus interest. If he can't pay, we file for judgment. I want it served by Friday." "Alice is going to call you," Sylvia said. "I know." "What are you going to say to her?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the email with its careful language and its CC. I thought about my daughter not calling me after her husband sent it. I thought about Macy and her horses and the word pop-pop in that small voice. "I'm going to tell her the truth," I said, eventually. The next 3 days were quiet. I finished the raised garden bed I'd been building in the backyard. Carol's project, the one I'd been putting off for 2 years. I planted garlic because garlic goes in the fall and comes up in spring and requires almost nothing from you except patience. I cooked real food for the first time in weeks. I slept. Alice called on Thursday evening. I let it ring. She called again 10 minutes later. I picked up. "Dad." Her voice was careful, measured. It had a quality I recognized from when she was 16 and had done something she knew I'd find out about. "I just wanted to check in." "I'm fine," I said. "How's Macy?" "She's good. She lost another tooth." "Dad, I was hoping we could talk about Kevin's email." "I've already handled it," I said. A pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I've thought it over and I agree with him. You need your space. I'm giving it to you." Another pause, longer. "Dad, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being agreeable." I let that sit for a second. "Give Mackie a hug for me." I hung up gently. My hands were shaking. That surprised me. The demand letter arrived at their house on Friday at 11:14 a.m. I know the exact time because Sylvia had sent it certified mail with tracking, and I checked the delivery confirmation 3 times before noon. $30,000 plus 6% annual interest, due in full within 30 days. Kevin called me at 2 p.m. I didn't answer. He called again at 2007, then 2019. Then he texted, "We need to talk. This is absurd." I put my phone in a kitchen drawer and went back to the garden. Alice called at 4:30. I answered. "Dad, what is going on?" Her voice was different now. The measured quality was gone. She sounded young. "Kevin got a letter from a lawyer. He is completely blindsided. What is this?" "It's a demand notice," I said, "for the loan I made to Kevin 18 months ago. The money he was going to use to start the logistics consulting business. The business that lasted 43 days. You said that was a gift. I never said that. Kevin signed a promissory note. I have the original. Silence. Alice, I said, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I have been contributing to your household for 2.5 years, and last Tuesday I received a formal email from your husband telling me to stay away. He can't have both. Nobody gets both. He was just trying to set some limits, Dad. He was trying to set limits on my presence while keeping full access to my bank account. That's not limits. That's a toll booth with no road. I heard her breathing. I heard Mossy in the background asking about something, a snack or a show, the ordinary sounds of a household in the late afternoon. I need some time, Alice said finally. Take all the time you need, I said, but Kevin has 30 days. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. I thought about Carol, about what she would have said. She would have been faster than me. She would have seen Kevin clearly in year 1. She would have pulled me aside at some family dinner and said, Gil, that man is spending you like an expense account. She had a gift for seeing through performance. I didn't inherit it. I had to learn it the hard way. The way you learn most important things, at significant cost. The next 2 weeks were the most peaceful I'd had in years. I took a day trip to Hocking Hills. I had lunch with an old colleague who'd also just retired. I started reading a history of the Transcontinental Railroad, a book I'd bought 3 years ago and never opened. I woke up in the mornings without that low-level background dread, the constant waiting for the next thing to go wrong in my daughter's house that I would be expected to fix. Meanwhile, I knew, without being there, what was happening 5 miles away. Kevin was not a man built for financial reality. He had grown up with a father who had paid for everything and a mother who called that support. He had an MBA from a mid-tier school and a talent for sounding more confident than he was. When the demand letter arrived, his first move was to call 2 lawyers, both of whom told him, after brief consultations, that the promissory note was valid, that the interest clause was enforceable, and that without documentation proving the money was a gift, he had no defense. His second move was to start a fight with Alice about whose fault this was. Alice told me this later, much later, when she was ready to talk about all of it. She told me that the night the letter arrived, Kevin had sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a notepad, trying to find a way out of the numbers. She said he looked at her at one point and said, "You need to fix this with your father." She asked him what exactly she was supposed to fix. He told her she needed to get me to drop it. She told him that I had been very clear and she didn't think I was bluffing. He told her that I was an old man having an episode, and she needed to manage me. That was the night Alice stopped managing me and started watching her husband. The 30-day window closed without payment. Sylvia filed for civil judgment. The filing became public record. Kevin's credit took a hit that cost him a refinancing application he had apparently been quietly working on, trying to pull equity out of a house I had helped them buy in order to pay off the credit cards they'd run up, living a life they couldn't afford. The refinancing fell through. The credit card stayed maxed. The math, which they had been rearranging creatively for 3 years, stopped moving. I got a call from Kevin on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the filing. I was at the farmer's market buying apples, the irony of which was not lost on me. I stepped away from the stand and answered. His voice had changed. The polish was gone. He sounded tired and younger than he actually was. "Gilbert," he said, "I think we should sit down." "All right," I said. "Alice and we're going through some things. This legal situation isn't helping." "I imagine not." "I'm willing to discuss a payment plan, something manageable, maybe stretch it over a few years." I watched a woman pick up a bundle of kale and put it back down. "Kevin," I said, "I don't want a payment plan." Silence. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to understand that money I give is connected to me. You don't get to take it and then tell me to disappear. That was the misunderstanding. Now that we've cleared it up, I'm open to a conversation about the judgment, but not on the phone." He agreed to meet the following Tuesday at Sylvia's office. He came alone. I came with Sylvia. He was wearing the polished version of himself, the slim-fit shirt, the careful hair, but his eyes were different. He sat down across from me, and for the first time in 4 years of knowing him, he didn't immediately start talking. Sylvia walked him through the numbers the same way she had walked me through them, methodically, without drama. The judgment amount. The accrued interest. The documentation of transfers that could be characterized as conditional loans given the totality of the relationship and the expectations established by the promissory note. Kevin listened. He asked 2 questions. Both were good questions, which surprised me slightly. He was smarter than he'd been acting. At the end, he looked at me directly. "What do you actually want out of this?" he asked. "Because I don't think it's the money." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. "No," I said, "it's not the money. The money is the language I'm using because it's the only language you've been listening to. What I want is for you to understand that my daughter is not a lifestyle upgrade. She is not a means to a house in a good neighborhood and a bathroom with Italian tile and dinner parties where you imply that things are better than they are. She is a person who lost her mother when she was 21 and who deserves a partner who sees her, not what she comes with." Kevin sat with that for a long time. Long enough that it got uncomfortable. Long enough that I thought maybe it was actually reaching something. "And Macy?" he asked. "Macy is my granddaughter," I said. "Whatever happens between you and Alice and me, that doesn't change. That will never be a bargaining chip. If you ever try to use her as one, the judgment will be the least of your concerns." He nodded. He didn't flinch at that. Another surprise. We reached a settlement agreement by the end of the hour. He would pay back $15,000 over 24 months. I agreed to drop the interest and the secondary claims. In exchange, we signed a mutual acknowledgement. Both parties witnessed that no future personal transfers would be considered loans unless documented in advance. Clean slate. New rules. Sylvia walked him to the elevator. When she came back, she sat down and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "You let him off easy," she said. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I needed him to feel the process, not just the outcome." She considered that. "How's Alice?" "I don't know yet," I said. "That part isn't finished." It wasn't. Alice and I had spoken twice since the letter. Both times briefly, both times with that careful, measured quality in her voice that told me she was still sorting through something. I didn't push. I had said what I needed to say. The rest was hers to work out. She came to the house on a Sunday in November. She came alone, which told me everything. She had Mossy with her, which told me the rest. Macy ran up the front walk and hit me at the knees going full speed, her coat half zipped, one boot untied, yelling "Pop, pop" in that voice that still feels like being handed something precious. I caught her. I held on. Over the top of her head, I looked at Alice coming up the walk, hands in her coat pockets, eyes doing that thing they do when she's trying not to cry. The thing that looks exactly like Carol. We sat at the kitchen table after Mossy had been settled in the living room with a video about horses and a bowl of crackers. Alice wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at the table for a moment, then at me. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You don't." "Dad." She looked up. "Let me say it." I let her say it. She talked for 20 minutes. About Kevin and the email and the way she had seen it before he sent it and had told herself it was reasonable, that I did come over a lot, that maybe boundaries were healthy, the language Kevin used. Boundaries. Space. Dynamic. It had sounded so reasonable. She talked about the night the demand letter arrived, and the things Kevin said, and the moment she realized she had been interpreting her husband's behavior through the kindest possible lens for a very long time, because the alternative was too hard to look at. She talked about the money, about how she told herself I offered, that it was fine, that I could afford it, that it wasn't really a problem. She talked about the bathroom and what she knew now about Kevin paying himself a management fee for my transfer. She talked about a lot of things. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say "I told you so." I have never found those 4 words useful. When she was done, I said, "Alice, none of this broke us. You understand that, right?" She nodded, but her eyes filled anyway. "I was never angry at you," I said. "I was scared for you. There's a difference." We sat there for a while. From the living room came the sound of a documentary narrator explaining something about Arabians. "What's going to happen?" Alice asked. "With you and Kevin?" "We've settled the legal piece," I said. "Beyond that, that's between you two. I'm not part of your marriage. I shouldn't be. I never should have been, financially or otherwise." She looked at me for a long moment. "Are you going to keep helping us?" It was a fair question, an honest one. "I'm going to help you," I said. "You specifically. If you need something, you ask me directly and we talk about it like 2 adults, No transfers to joint accounts. No checks written because Kevin mentioned the roof needs work. No more of that. But you? You're my daughter. That doesn't have an end date. She put her hand over mine on the table. Her hand was cold from holding the mug. What about Kevin? She said quietly. I looked at her. She wasn't asking what I thought of him. She already knew that. She was asking something else, something she hadn't said yet. What do you want? I asked. She looked out the window at the backyard, at the apple tree bare, now in November, at the raised bed I'd built and planted, at the ordinary late autumn plainness of it. I think I need some time to figure that out, she said. Then take it, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Alice filed for separation 4 months later. She moved into an apartment in Clintonville with Mossy, a good school district, 3rd floor, enough light. Kevin got a studio in Westerville and a wake-up call from a judge who noted, in the divorce proceedings, that the financial arrangement of the marriage had been significantly dependent on the wife's father, and that the husband had demonstrated a pattern of economic reliance that did not reflect the standard of partnership. I did not gloat. I tried not to, anyway. What I did do, I showed up every Sunday. I picked Mossy up from school 2 days a week when Alice had late meetings. I fixed the leaky faucet in the apartment. I sat at Alice's kitchen table and drank coffee that she had started buying because it was my brand. And I did not mention Kevin unless she did. And I did not say anything when she mentioned him that I had not already thought carefully about. One Sunday in March, Mossy brought me a drawing she'd made at school. It was a house, a tree, a sun, 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. She had written words under each one in her careful first-grade letters. The tall one said, "Pop, Pop." The small one said, "Ma said." I put it on the refrigerator with a magnet from the farmer's market. There were days I questioned myself. There were nights I lay awake running the same calculation I always ran, the one that tried to determine where exactly help stops being help and starts being harm. It's not a clean answer. It never is. I gave too much for too long, and some of that is on me. I wanted to be needed. After Carol died, being needed felt like purpose. Kevin understood that, whether he knew it consciously or not, and he used it. That's the part that took me the longest to admit. But here's what I know now. The moment I stopped being an ATM was the moment Alice started seeing her husband clearly. The moment I pulled back was the moment she found the ground under her own feet. You can love someone and still make room for gravity. You have to. Gravity is how they learn they can stand. The garlic I planted in October came up in April, green and insistent and entirely unimpressed by everything that had happened between planting and harvest. I pulled a bulb out of the ground and held it in my hand. Carol would have been delighted by that. She loved a thing that kept its word. I am Gilbert Moore. I am 64 years old. I spent 32 years making sure the ground held for other people. It took me a little longer to remember to check the ground under my own feet. It held. I'm still here. I think about the apple tree a lot. Carol planted it the year Alice was born, and for a long time I thought of it as hers. Carol's tree, Carol's daughter, Carol's backyard. But Carol was gone, and I'm the one who has been tending it. Pruning it in February, raking what it drops in October, watching it do what it does regardless of whether anyone is paying attention. There's something in that I couldn't have articulated 2 years ago, but understand now in my bones. The things that are real keep growing even when no one is watching. The things that are performance eventually stop. Kevin was a performance, a good one, for a while. But performances require an audience that keeps paying, and the moment I stopped paying, the curtain came down on its own. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I spent 4 years confused about why the situation kept getting worse the more I tried to help, and the answer, when I finally looked at it straight, was simple. I was funding a fiction. Every check I wrote made the fiction easier to maintain. Every time I quietly absorbed the cost of their life, I made it possible for Kevin to believe, and for Alice to half believe, that things were fine. Things were not fine. But comfortable fictions are hard to let go of, especially when someone else is paying for them. What I had to learn at 64, at significant personal expense, was the difference between love and rescue. I loved Alice. I was rescuing Kevin. Those are not the same thing, and I had tangled them together for years because untangling them would have required me to say no, and saying no to your daughter after her mother dies feels like another kind of abandonment. I understand now that it wasn't. Saying no was the most honest thing I could have done for her. It was the thing that finally gave her enough clarity to see her own life clearly. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain, where a stubborn old man calls in a loan and blows up his daughter's marriage over pride. I've thought about that version. I've sat with it. But here's what I keep coming back to. Alice didn't lose a good marriage. She lost a comfortable arrangement that was slowly making her smaller. And she found that out not because I never told her what to think about her husband, but because when the money stopped, the truth had nowhere left to hide. Macy's drawing is still on my refrigerator. Pop, pop, Emmy. 2 stick figures under a sun. That drawing required nothing from me except showing up. Not a check, not a loan, not a transfer to a joint account. Just showing up, consistently, over time. Being someone she could count on. That's the thing I got right even when I was getting everything else wrong. I kept showing up for her. And in the end, that's what Alice remembered too. Not the money. The presents. I planted garlic in October and it came up in April. I didn't do anything special. I just put it in the ground and left it alone long enough to do what it was always going to do. Some things work like that. Some people do too. If you give them enough room and enough time and enough of the right kind of trust, the kind that believes in what they're capable of, rather than what they currently need. That's what I'm trying to be now. Not a safety net, a witness, someone who watches and waits and believes in the growing even when the ground looks empty.